The wedding of dreams, the boy of secrets. The grand hall shimmered under the glow of a magnificent crystal chandelier, casting a golden radiance over the sea of elegantly dressed guests. Rows of chairs, draped in ivory satin, stretched from the entrance to the beautifully adorned altar, where the ceremony was moments away from beginning. The soft melody of a string quartet wove through the air, harmonizing with the delicate scent of fresh roses and jasmine. It was the kind of wedding that seemed to be pulled straight from the pages of a fairy tale, a day meticulously planned, where every detail had been polished to perfection. At the heart of it all stood Mark Whitmore, the groom. His broad shoulders squared, his sharp navy blue suit fitting him with a crisp elegance that exuded confidence. His light blue eyes, clear and focused, held a quiet intensity as they gazed toward the aisle. He was the picture of composure, though those who knew him well would recognize the small telltale sign of his nerves, the faint tapping of his fingers against his thigh, a subtle rhythm betraying the anticipation coursing through him. Beside him, Amanda Carter, the bride, was a vision of radiance. Her ivory wedding gown hugged her slender frame before flowing into a cascading train of silk and lace. Tiny pearls adorned the fabric like stars in the night sky, and her veil draped delicately over her shoulders. She was stunning, but more than that, she was glowing. Her deep brown eyes shimmered with emotion, and her full lips curled into a gentle smile as she held Mark's hands. For Amanda, this moment was more than just a wedding. It was a promise of new beginnings. The lace at the hem of her gown had belonged to her late mother, a small piece of the past stitched into the fabric of her future. She had spent months preparing for this day, carefully planning every detail, ensuring that everything was just right. And yet, amidst the soft glow of candlelight and the hum of whispered conversations, there was one person who didn't share in the joy of the occasion. A few feet away, standing slightly apart from the altar, was Jaden Carter, Amanda's 10-year-old son. He was dressed in a miniature version of Mark's suit, his tie slightly crooked from his impatient tugging. His small hands were clenched at his sides, and his dark brown eyes remained fixed on the floor, his jaw set in quiet determination. Unlike the guests who watched the ceremony with warmth in their gazes, Jaden's expression was unreadable, a storm of emotions brewing behind his reserved exterior. To the outside world, this wedding was perfect. But Jaden knew something that no one else did. Amanda had spent countless nights assuring him that Mark was a good man, that he would be a wonderful stepfather, that this new life they were stepping into would be filled with love. But Jaden wasn't convinced. He had always trusted his instincts, and something about Mark never sat right with him. It wasn't that Mark had ever been cruel to him. No, Mark was too smart for that. He was always polite, always careful, always just, distant. Jaden had overheard whispers, caught glimpses of moments Amanda hadn't seen. He had spent weeks debating whether he should say anything, whether anyone would even believe him. But now, standing in the grand hall, watching his mother take Mark's hand, Jaden realized that this was his last chance. He reached into the pocket of his jacket and clutched the folded piece of paper he had written the night before. His heart pounded in his chest. This wasn't just a wedding to him. This was the moment that would change everything, and he was about to stop it. As the officiant began speaking, his voice warm and steady, Jaden took a deep breath and stepped forward. Every eye in the room turned toward him. Amanda's breath hitched as she saw her son walking toward them, his small frame tense, his movements deliberate. Mark's brow furrowed in confusion, but he kept his expression neutral. Jaden didn't say a word. He simply extended his hand, offering Mark the note. A hush fell over the hall. Mark hesitated before finally taking the paper. His fingers unfolded it, and as his eyes scanned the words, his expression shifted. His jaw tightened. His nostrils flared. A shadow passed over his face. Amanda's heart pounded as she watched her fiancé's reaction. Then, Mark froze. The note trembled in his hands. Silence enveloped the room. And in that moment, everything changed. The secrets within the note. A thick silence swallowed the room. The once harmonious hum of whispered admiration, the soft tinkling of glasses, and the gentle music from the quartet had all vanished in an instant. Every guest sat frozen, their eyes shifting between the boy standing defiantly before the groom and the note trembling in Mark's grasp. Amanda's pulse pounded in her ears as she stared at Mark, searching for answers in the sudden shift of his expression. His face, once calm and composed, had hardened, his fingers gripping the note so tightly that the paper crinkled beneath them. His lips, usually curved into his signature, confident smile, now pressed into a thin line. His blue eyes darkened with something unreadable, something Amanda had never seen before. Mark had never been a man who showed his emotions so openly. He was controlled, careful, calculated. But at that moment, his entire demeanor fractured. Amanda turned to her son. "Jaden." Her voice was barely above a whisper, a plea wrapped in confusion. Jaden didn't flinch. His hands were balled into fists at his sides, his stance unwavering. He had never felt more nervous in his life, but he had also never been more sure of something. The guests were beginning to murmur now, hushed whispers rippling through the crowd like an oncoming storm. What's happening? What did the note say? Is this part of the ceremony? But Amanda wasn't listening to them. She was watching Mark, watching the way his chest rose and fell, the way his grip on the paper faltered. Slowly, she reached for the note, her fingers brushing against his as she took it from his hand. The paper was slightly crumpled now, but the words written in Jaden's careful, uneven handwriting were still clear. "Mom, don't marry him. I know the truth." Amanda felt the breath leave her lungs. She looked back at her son, her heart aching at the raw emotion in his eyes. "Jaden, what does this mean?" Jaden swallowed hard, his throat dry. He had practiced this in his head 100 times. He had rehearsed what he would say if it ever came to this. But now, standing before a sea of expectant faces, with his mother's entire future on the line, the words felt heavier. "I heard him," Jaden finally said, his voice shaking slightly but growing stronger with each word. "I heard Mark talking on the phone 2 nights ago. He was in his office, and he didn't know I was listening." Amanda's heart pounded as Jaden continued. "He was talking to another woman. He told her." Jaden's small fingers curled tighter into his palms. "He told her he didn't love you, that this wedding was just a step, that you—" He hesitated, his gaze flickering to his mother's. "That you were nothing but a means to an end." A gasp rippled through the room. Amanda took a sharp breath, feeling as though the ground beneath her had suddenly tilted. She turned to Mark, searching his face for a denial, a defense, anything. But Mark just stood there, silent. His eyes, once warm and full of devotion, were now cold. The mask he had worn so perfectly for months, maybe even years, had cracked. "You don't believe this, do you?" Mark's voice was steady, but there was something almost calculated behind it. "Amanda, you know how much I love you. You know how much I care about Jaden. He's just a kid. Kids misunderstand things." Amanda turned back to her son. "Jaden, are you sure about this?" Jaden nodded furiously. "I swear, Mom." He said things about money, about power. He said marrying you would give him everything he needed. That's why he's doing this. It's not about love. Amanda felt her legs wobble beneath her. The weight of her son's words pressed down on her chest like a vice. And then, as if sensing that his carefully crafted world was crumbling, Mark took a step forward. His hands reached out, his voice dropping into a softer, more pleading tone. "Amanda, listen to me," he said, locking eyes with her. "You know how much I've done for you, how much we've built together. You're really going to let the words of a child ruin everything?" He's just upset. He doesn't want things to change. That's what this is about. Amanda hesitated. Her heart was waging a war with her mind. Mark had been nothing but supportive, attentive, affectionate. He had been there through late nights when she cried over her job, when she worried about Jaden's school struggles, when she felt like she was failing as a mother. But now she couldn't unsee the way he wasn't denying anything. He wasn't angry that Jaden was lying, because Jaden wasn't lying. A deep, suffocating silence settled over the hall. The guests, who had once been basking in the magic of a perfect wedding, now watched with bated breath as a love story unraveled before their very eyes. Then, a voice from the back of the room cut through the tension. "I think we all deserve to know the truth." Amanda's gaze snapped toward the direction of the voice, and her stomach dropped when she saw who had spoken. A woman, dressed in a sleek black dress. She stepped forward from the crowd, her sharp heels clicking against the marble floor, her dark eyes locked on Mark. Mark's entire body stiffened. Amanda's breath caught in her throat, because she recognized the woman. It was Mark's ex-fiancée, and she was holding another note. The room collectively held its breath. Mark's jaw clenched, his entire body tensed, his hands balling into fists at his sides. For the first time since the note had been handed to him, his control was slipping. The woman walked right up to Amanda and handed her the folded paper. "I should have done this sooner," she murmured. Amanda's fingers trembled as she took the note. With a deep, shuddering breath, she unfolded it, and as her eyes scanned the words, her vision blurred. Because the note contained the exact same words Jaden had written. "Don't marry him. I know the truth." A sharp, stunned silence filled the hall. Then, a single, quiet whisper slipped from Amanda's lips. "Oh my God." And in that moment, she knew. Her son had been right all along. A web of lies unraveling. A heavy silence blanketed the grand wedding hall, thick with anticipation and tension. The crystal chandelier that once bathed the room in warmth now seemed cold, its light casting stark shadows over the frozen faces of the guests. Amanda stood at the altar, her hands trembling as she clutched both notes, the one her son had given her, and the identical one from Mark's ex-fiancée. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, rapid breaths as realization dawned on her like an unstoppable tidal wave. Mark, the man she had trusted with her heart, the man she had promised to spend forever with, had been deceiving her. Jaden, her sweet, observant son, had tried to protect her. And the woman standing before her, Mark's ex-fiancée, was living proof that this wasn't just some misunderstanding. It was a pattern. The murmurs of the guests swirled around them, growing louder by the second. Who is she? What does that note mean? Did she just say the truth? Mark's face was stone, but Amanda could see the slight twitch in his jaw, the way his fingers curled into his palms. He was losing control of the situation, and Mark hated losing control. Amanda lifted her gaze, locking eyes with the woman before her. "You knew," Amanda whispered, voice barely above a breath. The woman, tall, elegant, with piercing hazel eyes, gave her a slow, sad nod. "My name is Vanessa," she said, her voice clear and unwavering despite the tension crackling in the air. "I was engaged to Mark 2 years ago." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Amanda felt like the floor had been yanked from beneath her. 2 years ago. That was right before Amanda had met him. Vanessa swallowed hard, her gaze flickering toward Mark before landing back on Amanda. "We were supposed to get married. Everything was perfect. Until I found out the truth." The truth. Amanda's voice was barely her own. Vanessa let out a slow breath, then turned, addressing the guests as much as Amanda. "Mark doesn't marry for love," she said, her tone sharp with certainty. "He marries for gain, for power, for control. With me, it was about my father's business. He wanted control over it, and our marriage was the perfect way to secure it. But when I found out, when I confronted him," she hesitated, her voice tightening, "he made sure I wouldn't be able to say anything. He destroyed my credibility. He painted me as a liar, as unstable. And then, once I was out of the picture, he moved on." Vanessa turned her gaze back to Amanda, her expression unreadable. "This time, it was you." Amanda's breath caught in her throat. She turned to Mark, begging him with her eyes to deny it, to tell her this was all a mistake, a misunderstanding. But instead, she saw something else in his face. Not regret, not sorrow, not even anger. Amusement. The corners of his lips barely moved, but Amanda saw it, the flicker of a smirk. A chill ran down her spine. You knew I would find out eventually," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Didn't you?" Mark exhaled sharply, shaking his head as if exhausted by all of this. "Amanda," he said, his voice suddenly smooth again, like he was slipping back into character. "This is ridiculous. She's bitter. She's trying to ruin this for us. And your son, he's just a child. He's confused." Amanda flinched. Jaden. Her eyes darted to her son, standing a few feet away, his small body stiff, his hands clenched into tight fists. She had spent his whole life protecting him, making sure he felt safe, making sure he knew she would always believe him. And now, at this moment, in front of all these people, Mark had just dismissed him, belittled him. Amanda turned back to Mark, her heart hammering in her chest. "Then prove them wrong," she challenged, her voice regaining its strength. Mark arched a brow. "Excuse me?" She took a step closer, holding both notes up between them. "If this is just some bitter ex and a misunderstanding from my son, then prove it. Tell me, on our wedding day, in front of all these people, that you love me, that you're marrying me for love, and not for anything else." Mark's nostrils flared slightly. His grip tightened at his sides. For the first time, he looked trapped. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The silence stretched. The guests watched with bated breath. Vanessa crossed her arms. Jaden stood firm, his little face fierce with determination. And Mark, the man who always had the perfect words, the perfect control, stood there, speechless. That was all the answer Amanda needed. Slowly, she removed the engagement ring from her finger. The platinum band felt cold against her skin. She held it up for a long moment, looking at it, at everything it symbolized, every promise, every whispered word of devotion, every carefully crafted illusion. Then she dropped it. The clink of metal against marble echoed in the vast room. Gasps filled the air. Mark's eyes widened. "Amanda." "No." Amanda's voice was firm. She turned away from him, walked past Vanessa, and stopped in front of Jaden, her son, the one person who had loved her without conditions. Amanda knelt, gripping his small hands in hers. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I should have believed you the moment you spoke." Jaden's eyes filled with tears. "Mom." But she pulled him into a hug before he could say another word. The guests erupted into hushed conversations. Some were shocked, some scandalized, some utterly satisfied by the turn of events. But Amanda didn't care about any of them anymore. She had spent months planning the perfect wedding, the perfect life with Mark. But now she saw it for what it really was, an illusion. She had almost walked into a future built on lies. But Jaden, he had saved her. As she pulled back, wiping away her own tears, she took his small hand in hers. "Come on," she said, lifting her chin high. "Let's go." Together, mother and son turned and walked down the aisle, not toward a future of deception, but toward a new beginning. Behind them, Mark stood frozen, his mask finally shattered. And as Amanda reached the grand doors of the hall, stepping out into the crisp afternoon air, she never looked back. The aftermath of a broken vow. The moment Amanda stepped out of the grand wedding hall, the fresh air hit her like a wave of clarity. The thick perfume of roses and jasmine that had once felt enchanting inside now seemed suffocating in hindsight. It was a symbol of the illusion she had almost drowned in. Jaden's small hand gripped hers tightly as they walked across the luxurious courtyard. His steps hurried, almost as if he feared that if they lingered too long, Mark would chase after them. But Amanda knew Mark wouldn't. Not now. Not after everything. Her heart still pounded against her ribs, adrenaline still rushing through her veins. She had just walked away from her own wedding. The wedding she had poured months of planning, money, and hope into. But as she glanced down at her son, she knew she had done the right thing. "Mom." Jaden's voice was small, hesitant. Amanda stopped and knelt beside him, cupping his face in her hands. "Yes, baby. I didn't ruin everything, did I?" His eyes shimmered with unused tears, and Amanda's heart clenched. She inhaled sharply, shaking her head. "No, Jaden. You saved me." His lower lip trembled. "But everyone was looking at me like I did something bad." Amanda kissed his forehead, holding back her own tears. "That's because they don't know the truth yet. But I do. And you were so brave." Jaden sniffed. I just wanted to make sure you wouldn't get hurt." Amanda pulled him into a tight hug. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me," she whispered. "I love you so much." For the first time since entering that wedding hall, Amanda felt whole again. The guests are divided. Back inside the wedding hall, chaos had erupted in Amanda's absence. Some guests whispered furiously, others gossiped loudly, and a few, especially those who had never fully trusted Mark, wore smug expressions as if they had known something was off about him all along. Mark, however, was livid. His jaw was clenched so tight it looked like it might shatter. His fists remained at his sides, his fingers twitching as he scanned the crowd. Vanessa, standing tall with arms crossed, smirked. Well, that was quite a scene. Mark's eyes snapped toward her, burning with fury. "You planned this." She tilted her head. "Me? I didn't write that note, Mark." She nodded toward the door where Amanda had just left. "Your fiancé's son did." Mark's teeth ground together. He had always prided himself on controlling every situation, every person in his life. But this was humiliating. His business associates had attended the wedding. Investors. People who had believed in his clean, charming image. And now they were all looking at him as if he were rotten. He turned his gaze toward his parents, who sat stiffly in the front row. His father's expression was unreadable, but his mother, she was mortified. "You had everything lined up," she muttered under her breath when he stormed past her. "And you let a child destroy it." Mark's nails dug into his palm. He wanted to fix this. He needed to fix this. Amanda's escape plan. Meanwhile, Amanda had finally reached her car, but the reality of what had just happened was sinking in fast. She was standing there in her wedding dress, the expensive lace and embroidery suddenly feeling foreign on her body. The parking lot was empty except for a few scattered cars, the silence making her heartbeat even louder in her ears. What now? The wedding had been paid for. The venue. The catering. The flowers. Thousands of dollars spent on a future that no longer existed. But none of that mattered. What mattered was getting away. "Mom." Jaden spoke up again, looking up at her nervously. "Where are we going to go?" Amanda exhaled, running a hand through her sleek, styled hair, now slightly unraveled from all the chaos. She had a hotel booked for the honeymoon, but the thought of stepping into that luxury suite, meant for her and Mark, made her stomach churn. Her house. No, Mark knew where she lived. She needed space. She needed time. And then it hit her. "Grandma's," she said suddenly, meeting Jaden's eyes. "We're going to your grandma's house." Jaden's face lit up. "Grandma Maria?" Amanda nodded. Her mother's house was a safe place, far enough from the city, but close enough that she wouldn't feel completely disconnected. "Come on," she said, unlocking the car. As they climbed in, Amanda took a deep breath, gripping the steering wheel. Her phone buzzed furiously in the cup holder. Calls, texts, voicemails. She didn't have to look to know they were from Mark. Without hesitation, she switched it off. And then, without looking back, she started the engine and drove away. Mark's final play. Back at the wedding venue, Mark paced furiously, strategizing. Amanda couldn't just walk away from him like this. She was supposed to be his wife, his partner. He had spent too much time and effort crafting this perfect engagement. And now, she had embarrassed him. He had to get her back. He needed her to come crawling back. Mark turned sharply and grabbed his phone. If she wouldn't answer his calls, then he knew someone who would. Her best friend. A wicked smirk played at his lips as he dialed the number. "Hey, Nina," he said smoothly when she answered. "Listen, I need to talk to you about Amanda. She's making a huge mistake, and I think you're the only person who can get through to her." Mark knew exactly how to manipulate people, and if Amanda thought she could run from him, she had another thing coming. A new beginning or a new battle. As Amanda and Jaden drove toward her mother's house, she felt an overwhelming mix of emotions: relief, heartbreak, exhaustion, and fear. What if Mark didn't let go so easily? What if she had just made an even bigger enemy? And what if she wasn't truly free yet? As Jaden hummed quietly to himself in the backseat, Amanda forced herself to push those thoughts away. For now, she had her son. She had her freedom. And she had made the right choice. But deep down, she knew this wasn't over. Not yet. Shadows of the past and the fight for freedom. A silent drive. A storming mind. The winding road to Amanda's mother's house stretched before her, a dark ribbon under the moonlit sky. The car's tires hummed steadily against the asphalt, but inside, Amanda's mind was anything but steady. Jaden had finally drifted to sleep in the backseat, his small frame curled up in the warmth of the leather seats. Amanda stole a glance at him through the rearview mirror. His face, peaceful now, was a stark contrast to the fear and uncertainty he had worn earlier that evening. She should have been relieved. She should have felt the weight lift from her chest, now that she had walked away from a wedding built on deception. But the weight hadn't lifted. If anything, it had grown heavier. What if Mark came after her? Amanda gripped the steering wheel tighter. Mark wasn't the kind of man who took rejection lightly. His pride, his image, his need for control, she had shattered all of it in front of hundreds of people. He would not let this go. Her thoughts were interrupted by a buzzing sound. Her phone, resting in the cup holder, vibrated violently against the plastic. Even without looking, she knew who it was. Mark. Again. She didn't dare answer. She had ignored his last 15 calls. He had left voicemail after voicemail, each one growing more desperate, more insistent. Then, a text flashed across the screen. "You think you can humiliate me and just walk away? You're making a mistake, Amanda." Answer the phone. Her stomach twisted. He wasn't letting go. But she wasn't the same woman who had once believed in his charm, in his empty promises. He had fooled her before, but she wouldn't let him do it again. With a deep breath, she grabbed the phone, and without a second thought, turned it off completely. No more Mark. No more manipulation. No more fear. A mother's warmth and an old warning. By the time Amanda pulled into the long driveway of her mother's house, the exhaustion had fully settled into her bones. The old Victorian home stood tall and welcoming, its porch light casting a warm glow in the cool night air. The moment she stepped out of the car, the front door swung open. Maria, Amanda's mother, stood in the doorway, her robe pulled tightly around her, her eyes filled with both concern and relief. "Amanda," she breathed, hurrying down the steps. What happened? Amanda didn't trust herself to answer just yet. Instead, she opened the back door and carefully lifted Jaden into her arms. He stirred slightly but didn't wake. Maria took one look at her grandson's peaceful face and stepped aside. "Come inside. Both of you." As soon as Amanda walked in, the familiar scent of cinnamon and lavender wrapped around her like a protective embrace. This house, the one she had grown up in, was safe. She gently laid Jaden down on the couch, covering him with an old knitted blanket before following her mother into the kitchen. Maria poured a cup of chamomile tea and set it in front of Amanda before sitting down across from her. "Now," her mother said, her gaze unwavering, "tell me everything." Amanda sighed, running a hand through her undone hair. The wedding. It's over, Mom. I left. Maria studied her carefully, then nodded as if she had expected this. Because of Jaden. Amanda swallowed hard. Because of Mark. For a long moment, Maria didn't speak. Then she sighed. I tried to warn you, Amanda. A man like Mark, he's not someone you just leave without consequences. Amanda flinched. I know that now. Maria's expression softened. I'm not saying this to make you feel worse. I need you to be careful. If Mark is anything like I suspect, he won't just let this go. Amanda nodded. I know. A tense silence settled between them before Maria reached across the table and squeezed Amanda's hand. You did the right thing. You protected your son. And that is what matters. Amanda's eyes burned with unshed tears. I just don't know what happens next. Maria's lips pressed together. We figure it out. Together. Mark's next move. Across town, Mark sat in his dimly lit office, his fingers drumming angrily against the polished wood of his desk. The whiskey in his glass remained untouched, the ice slowly melting. His mind was spinning. Amanda had embarrassed him. She had walked out on him, in front of everyone. And worse, she had done it because of that child. Jaden, his hands clenched into fists. That little brat had ruined everything. Mark grabbed his phone and made a call. The voice on the other end answered immediately. Mark. I need information, Mark said coldly. Find out where Amanda went. A pause. Then, that's risky. She's made it clear she wants nothing to do with you. Mark's jaw tightened. I don't care. I need leverage, and I don't care what it takes to get it. He ended the call and leaned back in his chair, a slow smirk curling on his lips. Amanda thought she was free. She was wrong. A midnight revelation. Amanda stirred in the middle of the night, a deep unease settling in her chest. Something felt off. She glanced at the clock. 3:27 a.m. Carefully, she slipped out of bed and tiptoed down the hall. As she reached the living room, she saw Jaden still asleep on the couch, his tiny chest rising and falling steadily. She exhaled in relief. Then, she heard it. A car. Her heart stopped. Slowly, she crept toward the window and peeked through the curtains. A sleek black car was parked across the street. The engine was still running, the headlights dimmed. Amanda's blood ran cold. She knew that car. Mark. Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone. But then she remembered. It was still turned off. She sucked in a breath, her mind racing. This was exactly what her mother had warned her about. Mark wasn't letting go. And he was watching. Amanda swallowed the fear rising in her throat. If Mark thought she was going to crawl back to him, he had another thing coming. But one thing was clear. This wasn't over. Not yet. The final stand. Breaking free. A dangerous game. Amanda's pulse pounded in her ears as she stood frozen at the window, staring at the black car idling across the street. Mark. He had found her. She knew this moment would come, but she had hoped for more time. Time to breathe, to figure out her next move, to protect Jaden. Now, she had no choice but to act. Her breath came in shallow gasps as she reached for her phone, fumbling to turn it back on. The second it powered up, messages flooded in. You need to answer me, Amanda. You can't hide from me. Come home, or I'll make you regret this. Her stomach twisted. Her fingers hovered over the screen, debating whether to call the police. But would they even take her seriously? Mark was powerful, respected. He had connections everywhere, including law enforcement. She couldn't risk it. Instead, she turned to the only person she knew she could trust. Her mother. Amanda rushed down the hallway, her heart hammering against her ribs. She found Maria in the kitchen, sipping a cup of tea, as if she had been waiting. Her mother's sharp gaze flickered to Amanda's pale face. He's here, isn't he? Amanda swallowed hard. Across the street, Maria set down her cup and stood. I'll handle this. No, Amanda whispered fiercely. I don't want him anywhere near Jaden." Maria studied her daughter's face for a long moment, then nodded. "Then we do this my way." A mother's wisdom. Amanda watched as her mother pulled out an old, tattered box from the cabinet above the fridge. Inside were documents, old keys, and most importantly, a second phone. Maria handed it to Amanda. "Use this, not your phone. If Mark can track you, it'll be through that device." Amanda's breath caught in her throat. "How did you?" Maria sighed. "Because I've seen men like him before. You think your father was any different?" Amanda's chest tightened. She had spent most of her life not thinking about her father, a man who had controlled Maria in the same way Mark had tried to control her. Maria continued, her voice steady. "I didn't leave your father when I should have. I let fear keep me trapped. I won't let the same thing happen to you." Amanda nodded, determination hardening her spine. "Then we leave. Tonight." Maria's lips curved slightly. "Good. Then let's not waste any time." A desperate escape. Amanda packed their bags as quickly and quietly as possible. Only the essentials, clothes for her and Jaden, legal documents, and whatever cash Maria had stashed away over the years. She gently woke Jaden, brushing his curls away from his forehead. His sleepy eyes blinked open. "Mom," he mumbled. "Sheh, sweetheart," she whispered. "We have to go. Right now." Jaden didn't ask why. He just nodded and wrapped his arms around her neck as she carried him out. Maria was already waiting by the door, keys in hand. "We take my car, go through the back roads. I have a place we can stay for now." Amanda took a deep breath. She hated running. But this wasn't running. This was survival. Mark's breaking point. As Maria's car rolled out of the driveway, Mark tensed in his driver's seat. His fingers clenched around the steering wheel as he watched Amanda's mother's car disappear into the night. She was leaving him. His mind spun with rage. She was his. He had given her everything. His time, his money, his name. And she thought she could just walk away. No. Mark pulled out his phone and dialed a number. "She's gone," he said the moment the other line picked up. "Find out where she's going, and make sure she doesn't get far." A final confrontation. Amanda's heart pounded as Maria's car sped through the empty roads. She couldn't shake the feeling that Mark wouldn't just let them go. And she was right. Headlights appeared in the rearview mirror, gaining on them fast. Amanda's stomach dropped. "Mom." "I see it," Maria said, tightening her grip on the wheel. The black car swerved into their lane. Amanda gasped as Maria yanked the wheel to the side, narrowly avoiding a collision. "He's trying to run us off the road," Amanda cried. Maria gritted her teeth. "Not tonight." She slammed her foot on the gas, pushing the car to its limits. But Mark wasn't backing down. Amanda reached for her phone, dialing 911. "Emergency services. What's your emergency?" "My ex-fiancé is chasing us in his car. He's trying to force us off the road." Amanda's voice trembled. The dispatcher's voice was calm but urgent. "Stay on the line." "Where are you?" Maria shouted an address. "We're sending officers to intercept. Just keep moving," the dispatcher assured them. Mark's car veered dangerously close again, but before he could make another move, sirens blared in the distance. His headlights suddenly cut out, and his car swerved off into a side street. Amanda's breath came in ragged gasps. "Did we lose him?" Jaden's small voice whispered from the backseat. Amanda turned to face him, her heart aching at the fear in his young eyes. "Yes, baby," she whispered, kissing his forehead. "We lost him." Freedom. At last. By the time they reached Maria's safe house, a small cabin tucked away in the woods, Amanda felt the first true breath of relief in months. Jaden was safe. She was safe. And Mark was gone. As she tucked Jaden into bed, his tiny hand reached for hers. "Are we gonna be okay, Mom?" Tears stung Amanda's eyes, but she smiled. "Yes, sweetheart," she whispered. "We finally are." Outside, the night was silent, peaceful, For the first time in a long time, Amanda wasn't afraid. She had fought for her freedom. And this time, no one was taking it away from her.